So today we're continuing to look at using typography in design. So I wanted to start by going over some of the families of type. And families of type are just kind of groupings of styles. So there's individual fonts like Palatino, for example. And Palatino is in this group or family that some people call old style. And it's not super important that you remember the term old style. What's really important for you to do is just to look at each individual font, analyze it, and really think about what message the style that the font was designed in is saying in terms of your design work. So how can you use it to communicate? So old style, what really characterizes this group are the diagonal stresses. So you can see the O and how there's these moderate, thick, thin transitions in the strokes, and it's quite beautiful. Some people think it looks like the hand lettering of the scribes, but because it's kind of moderate, the thick, thin transitions, it still can be used in extensive copy paragraphs of text. There's also serifs on these font types in this family, and they're on the lowercase letters, and they're slanted usually. And so these moderate, thick, thin transitions, this diagonal stress, and these serifs are all kind of what characterize these individual fonts. Then we have modern. Modern is an invention of the 20th century. And you can see that in this family of fonts, there's really radical thick, thin transitions in the strokes. There's also these serifs on the lowercase letters, and they're very thin and horizontal. And there's a very vertical stress. So look at the O and look how extreme those thick, thin transitions are. And the stress is just up and down, vertical. And so this family of fonts is often really appropriate for a few words. It can get really hard to read, so I would really look at the paragraph and make sure that it's not overwhelming if you're designing if you have a couple of paragraphs to put in a design and you're using this font. Slab serif. So slab serif has serifs on lowercase letters. They're horizontal and pretty thick. There's almost no thick, thin transition. And so there might be a little bit of one. Look at the S, for example. The middle of the S is thicker than the top portion and the bottom portion, but it's very minor. So this group of fonts is pretty readable. You can use it with copy usually. Often you see some of these fonts with like children's books. Then sans serif. So this week you watched a movie, or you will watch a movie called Helvetica, and it's all about this sans serif font Helvetica that's used in design everywhere. And so it'll be interesting for me when you upload your discussion answers to see how you feel about Helvetica. So what characterizes Helvetica sans serif fonts is that there are no serifs anywhere, no thick, thin transitions in the strokes, no stress, and it's really just what it is. And it can be very appropriate, very beautiful. It can also, some people think it's just blah. So watch the movie and let's get your opinion. This script style of fonts is extremely decorative. And it's very appropriate sometimes depending on what your message is in your design. If you notice, the capital letters are very ornate, and so you almost always want to use capital letters very sparingly with this. You would almost never do a whole paragraph in this group of fonts because it's just too hard to read. Your eye just can't decipher. But you can see these letters are very gestural, they're organic, they're very beautiful. Then we have kind of flavor of the day. Now, what you should do as a designer is you should look at all the fonts out there, including fonts that are on DeFont, for example, where you can just kind of browse and look, and there's so many different choices. And then you should make a decision. Maybe it's better if you just hand draw your font. So you can do that on trace paper. You can hand draw in black pen. You can scan it in. You can vectorize it, and then you can use it in your work. The other thing you can do is you can grab a font and then vectorize it in the way that so it's or convert it so that it's like a regular path, and then you can modify it and really transition it into something that's appropriate for your needs. So these are kind of flavor of the day. There's no rules, and they're just developed alphabets. So there are principles of design applied to type, and what's extremely important is that you consider type as one of your design elements. And for example, this is using type and scale. So you think about type in terms of the visual hierarchy and what needs to be read first and then second. And then what's nice about this design is there's just an extreme shift in scale here. So I think the designer wanted you to read this first and then get curious and kind of go up to the sentence and read what was next there. Sometimes there's a cooperative action that occurs between type and visual, and sometimes type actually becomes visual and has a secondary meaning. Type is part of the rhythm of the design, and you really want to direct the reader from one typographic element to the other. And this is done with rhythm. This is really beautiful here, how the type goes on the line. And you know what I notice with beginning designers is they often just throw the type on, or they find empty space and they just put it in the empty space. And really it's thinking beyond that, and how can I really relate the type to the visual? How can I make the type interact with the visual and increase this unity within the space, or this rhythm within the space? So one of the designers on our list was David Carson, and he is really innovative in the way he uses type, and he designed for this magazine called Raygun. And I encourage you to Google David Carson and look at his work, because he was considered a typographic deconstruction designer, and he really deconstructed type, used it in innovative ways. This is really beautiful. I put it in here because I just thought it was nice. It's hard to see, I know, but there's this ghosting that's occurring with this shape, and it's really making this type visible here. And so ghosting is a good way to kind of offset type but still keep the image there. And really what you do is you create a shape around the type, and you either lighten the image in the background or you darken it, and you create this kind of ghosted frame. It's really good for the visual continuity because it makes the type readable, but you still keep the image. And I love this. I love how the top text here is just stretched across the page, and then this type is becoming the visual inside of the tree with this real decorative script font. Nice design. It's becoming the sound waves here. Also, when you're thinking about color and how to visually tie things together, color is a great way to do that. So color can add repetition to your design. It can create visual consistency. So I love how the red here is being used in that way to kind of visually tie everything together. Headbanger. What's really nice here is you have this kind of really intense headbanger text here. It's really mimicking the action of the two fighters, and there's this real tension. And then you have this paragraph down here, and this left justified super straight line is a nice contrast with the text in this part of the design. And then you have the title, really appropriate, beautifully done. The world is full of generic, mass-produced, homogenized products. Don't become one. Love this. King Lear. So another example of color. So notice how the text at the top here is pulling from the color on the clothing, and then there's also the color in the mouth, the blood. So there's this real visual continuity happening. And then to kind of offset William Shakespeare from King Lear, white was used, and also the way the letters are kind of curving down and back up again to create that spike, and then to kind of mimic the shape that's happening here. Another example of ghosting, and this is kind of a negative positive ghost that's happening. So the cross is becoming kind of the frame for this text. There's visual continuity with the color. There's a lot going on here, but it feels very harmonious to me, like it all works. I want to see this image. There's a strong focal point that's making me look, but then I'm kind of exploring it and reading. This is an interesting grid-based design. Kind of working on our grid projects, we understand this, and notice how it's just really nice how they're using the grid, they're using the text, they're kind of creating this really kind of captivating grid. This is an awesome ad where there's so much information in here, but it's so playfully done, and it works really well with the idea being kind of this energetic, free, gestural approach, and then you have this shape in the middle, which is the shoe, and I love how the shoelaces kind of go into the space. And then, you know, they're using scale here to kind of still keep readability within the space, so you can kind of see what's important for you to read. And then there's other stuff that you can read, you can explore. And so this visual hierarchy, what do we read first, second, third, fourth, sometimes with lots of text, you want to really establish that before you do the design. Use a condom. Love the use of negative space here. Very effective. So another thing to really pay attention to when you're designing with type is, and we've talked about this before, is the letter spacing, the word spacing, the line spacing. Spacing should enhance legibility usually, but what's really clever here is you look just the space between these individual letters and the O kind of falls off. So there's sometimes a need for you to kind of take the letters apart from the word and really think about what you're going to do with each individual space. And then of course there's the space between the lines and the space between the groups of words. So pay attention to that. Don't think that Illustrator or Photoshop or any word processing program does it for you. You have to do it, because often there's a huge problem with legibility if the spacing is too tight or too open, and it's really important for you as the designer to think about that. Just beautiful. I love the action here. It's really kind of connecting with the negative space. Really subtle. Kind of reminding me of David Carson. This might even be a David Carson design. I'm not sure, but it's really powerful. You have the educational up here, which is readable. Then you have the text used as kind of a design element, and you have a few graphics in here, but primarily this is a typographic design. Welt, just the rhythm of this design is fabulous. I love how these letters are floating within the space, but you still can read it. And then there's some continuity with the color, really working well with the negative space. It's just a beautiful example of rhythm. All I want is nothing, and I don't mind all. So I'm trying to read this, and it's not easy, but what's visually captivating about it is how this text is kind of interacting with the graphic and kind of going in between the space. It's becoming more readable. There's this real dynamic energy to this design. And then you have this text down here, which is offset because of the black space. Apocalypse. So there's a real contrast between this loving, beautiful couple and this apocalypse, what the word means, and then how the text is designed really is trying to emphasize that word apocalypse and make that word its meaning apparent.